want you to take a look at this map. Now, what does it remind you of? Africa, South America, or the Balkans? You have 5 seconds to guess. Go. If you chose the Balkans, then you're correct. Good job. Now, what if I told you these collections of nations used to be part of a massive empire? I know, hard to believe that this used to be once a massive empire, but it's all true. This empire was once called Uldarash, and during its peak, it was regarded as one of the most powerful states of all Ragnir. This is the history of the Uldarash Civil War. Summer 2021. Attis leads a group of his companions to the end to fight the gods of chaos, Entropy. Now, who is this Entropy fellow, you ask? Well, not much is known about her. However, she has been responsible for most of the major events that happened across Ragnir. You know that moon exploded? Yeah, that was her. Those raids Carfishes led? Yep, her as well. Oh, we can't forget the Coalition War. Essentially, fucking World War I. Yep, she was involved in that as well. So think of every major human catastrophe that's happened in history and blame it on her. After a long battle, Entropy was defeated, but in a final act of defiance, she would place a curse on Tequil Knight, rendering him ill and unfit to rule the Uldarashi Empire. So an election was held in which candidates from different states were chosen to become the next emperor. Now, a quick side note. Uldarash had 2 emperors, making it sort of like a dual monarchy. One was hereditary, while the other one was elected by the people. Now, if one of the emperors was incapacitated, then he would be replaced, either through elections or by blood. Now, after much debating and going back and forth with promises that I doubt they'll even keep, typical politicians, Quasar won the vote. Coincidentally, at the same time, K9 decided to step down and was replaced by Nicephorus. Celebrations occurred on this glorious day on the coronation of Nicephorus and Quasar. Immediately, she would use her role to improve the rights and privileges of the ordinary citizen by passing several reforms. One of these reforms was the creation of a lower chamber for the Uldarashi Congress, which served as a counterbalance to the High Council, a bunch of non-elected government officials. Mainly, pro-Quasar and the citizenry supported these reforms, while the Old Guard, that consisted of prominent experienced members, didn't like this approach. They believed it would lead to a substantial decline of Uldarash. These tensions would boil up following the Candy conspiracy. Players Mining Boy and Jack F. Candy were accused of secession. Jack would be banned before his trial, but Mining Boy would still be charged and exiled for his crimes, which was followed by protests from Mongrogans, believing their elected official had been unjustly removed based on false pretexts. Things would really start to escalate when a series of messages began to spread announcing the disposition of Quasar. On November 2nd, Quasar would publish an ultimatum giving the state 24 hours to have a trial and her reinstatement as empress. She also published a declaration proclaiming the forced abdication of Nicephorus and asks nations to recognize her as the sole legitimate ruler of Uldarash. When her demands went unanswered, the states of Montreuil and Alfheim pledged their support for Quasar, while Sanctuary, Alcard, and Jeffrey denounced the declaration, and Severance decided to remain neutral in the conflict, hoping for a peaceful resolution. Whether they knew it or not, peace was already a distant memory, as the battle lines were already drawn. The trial was held, in which Quasar was accused of election fraud. However, the prosecutor couldn't provide any evidence to back up his claim, so Quasar was declared innocent. This really wouldn't stop the domino effect from continuing on, as Alfheim and Montreuil declared a full allegiance to Quasar, and about a week later, the first shots of the Civil War would begin. Imperial forces would assault the island K9, kicking the loyalists off and back to the mainland. Even though it was a small skirmish and didn't really see any significance in the war, it was a victory regardless. Foreign powers would immediately take interest in the conflict by sending weaponry and materials as they hoped to tip the balance in their favor. In latent terms, this was quickly becoming a proxy war. Imperial forces would take the initiative by launching their offensive into Montreuil. Their goal was to take the capital of Montreuil, Troja, hopefully ending the war in one decisive battle. Expecting this, loyalist forces made preparations to defend the capital, as Imperial forces made preparations to take it, Both sides would prepare for a long and grueling siege. Imperial forces would launch their offensive by attacking from multiple directions in an effort to achieve a breakthrough. While this was ongoing, the Loyalists sent a contingent to attack the city of Northport in an effort to divert resources away from the siege. In response, an Imperial contingent was sent to deal with these saboteurs. Eventually, a breakthrough would occur as Imperial forces would push the Loyalists down from their positions and into the marketplace. Skirmishes would occur as the Loyalists would do everything in their power to make sure the situation was contained and prevented any further breakthrough. Imperials would then start charging down into the marketplace and slaughtering the defenders one by one. Their strength quickly overwhelmed the defenders as they were forced to scatter and retreat in a desperate attempt to flee the city. Quasar, among them, was injured, having to be evacuated through a hidden passageway out of the city. The city was looted and ransacked. Anyone unfortunate enough to be left behind was quickly slaughtered. By the end of the day, Troja was finally under Imperial control. Quasar would flee to Chervonstadt. Upon her arrival, she was given an update on the current situation on the Loyalist position, and it was not looking good. Their economy was declining, personnel were deserting, and allies were reconsidering their support for the Loyalist cause. Something needed to change. So Quasar and her war council devised a plan known as Operation Clapback Sandtrap, an all-out offensive to retake occupied territories and to take cities of strategic importance, with Kulio City and Apatimas being the most important cities to take. If the operation was successful, it would be a major turning point for the Loyalist cause. If they failed, that is what will await them. On November 21st, 2021, at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the offensive would begin. Loyalists on the eastern front would make rapid advances as the state of Chervki was densely populated and there were little to no Imperial settlements or fortifications in the area. The western front was the same story, with Loyalists retaking Tiatua, which would provide them with a base of logistics and operations for this front. Despite the initial success, they underestimated their capabilities as logistical lines became stretched, and miscommunication from officers played a key role in the campaign's failure. Apatimas, the imperial capital, was a primary target, and responsibility was the ancient aimbot for its capture. He ordered a frontal assault on the walls to create pressure and breakthrough. Some Imperials then set out to confront the Loyalists onto the field of battle, invigorating those on the wall to do the same. When the Loyalists started to lose ground in the middle of battle, communication at this very instance broke down as Bardonian soldier acted on his own volition, sounded their retreat. Some units began to fall back, while others continued to fight, as with aimbot doing everything he can to order them to stand their ground. Imperials saw an opportunity and striked, chasing the retreating Loyalists back to Tiatua until having to retreat to ensure the capital's safety. At the same time, the battle of Kulio City wasn't faring any better. Loyalists had positioned themselves on higher terrain and started firing arrows to dislodge the advancing Imperials, though to little success. Both sides soon charged, and despite the Imperials being outnumbered by 2-1, they put up a staunch resistance. It was during the battle that Nicephorus and Quasar would duel, with both sides on the other end spectating. Both combatants were equally matched, until Quasar had gained the upper hand and was about to deal the finishing blow. Nicephorus then managed to gain her footing by blocking it with her sword, kicking her to the ground and stabbing her in the arm, pinning her down. At the sight of this, Loyalists retreated and the battle was over. Loyalists were then pushed out of occupied Chervki, eliminating any progress that was made. Plus, with news of the counteroffensive's failure and Quasar's capture, Loyalist support quickly plummeted as governments began to pull out. The Loyalists were alone, and many knew it. It was only a matter of time before the Imperials arrived at their doorstep. That was until news arrived from the most unexpected place. The Alderman Entente had entered the war. The Entente was a multinational military alliance of the great powers of Eldom at the time. It encompassed major players such as the Iraqi Imperium and Zalmat's Union, all of them working together to achieve shared goals and interests. Before the Entente's entry, they had maintained a neutral stance, but that changed when a Roran citizen had stolen around 7 million worth of items. The Entente demanded compensation of 10 million, but the Iranian government refused, so the Entente entered the war on the side of the Loyalists. The Entente would arrive in Ardet for preparation and resupply, then sallied forth towards Fort Nost along with Loyalists and foreign volunteers. The Entente had arrived at the Royalist doorstep and were instantly met with volleys of arrow fire, but that didn't sway them from blowing a hole into the wall and storming in. Fighting was vicious. This was the Royals' home, their stay, and that urban warfare is a nightmare for every commander. The Entente had managed to push all the way to the chapel, but suffered heavy losses doing so. The Imperials, having reorganized from the initial assault, then countered, pushing them all the way back to the breach where fighting would ensue from there. The Entente would soon retreat, and the Imperials returned back to the safety of their walls. They needed to preserve their strength and prepare for the next encounter. The Battle of Fort Nost was one of the bloodiest engagements of the war, with both sides claiming victory. It's considered a stalemate, as neither side could finish each other off. The Loyalists were now invigorated, as they saw a victory it was now possible with the aid of the Entente. Despite the Entente's pledge to support the Loyalists, they would assess the situation carefully and come to the conclusion that a long and protracted war wasn't worth it. Entering negotiations with the imperial government and signing the Treaty of Hakinza, agreeing for the Imperials to pay 20 million trial for the criminals and independence of Savern and Uldarash. Though both countries were independent, it was temporary, with Savern joining Uldarash and Uldarash joined the Loyalist cause, but withdrew and became a protectorate under the Entente. Throughout the winter season, fighting would largely cease on all fronts. The Loyalists, demoralized, undersupplied, and defeated, would enter negotiations with the Imperials, and after a long deliberation, signed the Treaty of Troja on January 2nd, 2022, officially ending all hostilities. The states of Montroy and Eltham were reintegrated back into the empire, but under military administration. Quasar was forced to renounce her claim to the throne. Loyalists were given amnesty as the new Empress Scotch Knight, which had replaced Quasar during their war, wished to see Haven reunited and demonstrate compassion to their former enemy. Though some would flee to Eldom, still believing in the cause, created a nation distinct from their homeland, known as the Republic of Refuge. The Empire, though broken, had survived, with rebuilding and reconciliation being its primary task in order to return some semblance of stability before the war. However, a series of unfortunate crises and divisions would jeopardize the process, and on March 22, 2022, Uldarash would collapse, with various successor states claiming the mantle of the successor to Uldarash, each fighting control over the ashes of the Uldarash Empire before fading into the panels of history and being subjugated under the banner of the Crownlands of Ashahi, which has maintained hegemony over the Haven continent to this day. Hello, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was a really fun project to make, and I plan on making stuff like this more often in the future. Any form of feedback is appreciated, as it gives me the confidence to continue making stuff like this. And I haven't forgotten that Uldarash Empire nostalgia video that I promised back then. That it will be out in about, I believe, 2 weeks. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Mostly comment so I know what type of video you want to see next. And until then, happy holidays.